Oh, I meant to start my my live stream intro. I was distracted by some other things, so I'm gonna fix my background, and I'm gonna let the live stream intro play, and then I'll get started. My name is Rebecca Johnson, and I love Batman v Superman: Dawn of Justice. And I am publishing a series of videos exploring the reasons why I am such a fan of Zack Snyder's film. In this series, you'll find my thoughts on topics that matter to me, like Larry Fong's cinematography, character analysis on Lex Luthor and Lois Lane, the Christian imagery, what I find hopeful about the movie, and yes, I'll address the critical reception. So, if you're interested in any of those topics, I hope you will get something out of this series and find out why Batman v Superman: Dawn of Justice has had such a profound, heartfelt, and inspiring impact on my life. Welcome to the Duck Milk Prod YouTube channel. My name is Rebecca Johnson, and this live stream is part of a series I am calling Reading Reviews with Rebecca, which will analyze the critical reception of Batman v Superman: Dawn of Justice through the negative reviews written by top critics from Rotten Tomatoes, one review at a time. This is not meant to belittle anyone's opinions, but rather serve as a study of art criticism and how we discuss film. And I am hoping that this endeavor will encourage all of us, that includes myself, that we can be better consumers of cinema and how we talk about film. And I want to make sure all of my settings are right, because I've been so inconsistent about these live streams. It was like I almost forgot how to do it, which is crazy. So I'm going to try to just adjust some things here. So I'm a little out of sorts this week. So my apologies to anyone watching. It looks like I've got Mask of Shy with me. So feel free to share your thoughts, and I hope you are doing well. Well, this week I'll be reading through a review from the Miami Herald titled "The Audience Loses in Batman v Superman: Dawn of Justice," written by Rene Rodriguez. You can click on the link in the video description below if you'd like to follow along and read it for yourself. It looks like this one is archived, so you might have to subscribe to read it. So I tossed him a little money, a little dollar to look back at this quite some time later. So if you want to actually read it for yourself, you will have to subscribe in order to read it, because it is behind a paywall. But you can just hang out with me and we can read it together if you want to do that too. If Rene Rodriguez should ever see this video, I just want to say that I'm aiming to do this as civilly and analytically as possible. And I would like to ask that anyone watching live or posting in the comments section would do the same. I'm simply taking a look at the criticism for and of BVS now from an historical point of view, given that these reviews were used by Warner Brothers in their decision-making process regarding the DC Extended Universe. Due to the poor reviews for Batman v Superman, the tone and approach to the franchise were changed for Justice League and ultimately led to the destruction of the Snyderverse as we know it and as it was intended to be. So that is what I'm going to be doing here. And I know somebody might watching this might think, Renee from the Miami Herald is a professional film critic for a major news outlet. So who cares what you have to say, Rebecca? This is Renee's review from a professional standpoint. And you know what? I get it. I totally get it. I would be asking the same question. So I have a little bit of a video that you can check out to learn more about some things that maybe I can bring to the table. I graduated from the University of Alabama, Roll Tide, with a degree in telecommunications and film and a focus on broadcast television production. While I've never been to film school, in my television and production experience, I've learned about and have lots of practice in operating cameras, shot composition, and editing. Lighting, green screen, and audio are my weak spots, admittedly, but I've been working on those. After working in local TV news, running cameras, and working in production, I got a job at Turner, now Warner Media, or whatever they're calling themselves now, for 14 years. I worked with networks, or brands as they call them now, like TBS, TNT, Adult Swim, Cartoon Network, Boomerang, True TV, and Turner Classic Movies as a video encoding specialist. I also did a fair amount of closed captioning work and DVD and Blu-ray QC. In case you are wondering how I podcasted about Supergirl and the DCEU films while working for a Time Warner company, I actually got permission and clearance from my human resources representative. If you think I wouldn't criticize stories that were under the same corporate umbrella, that was never a problem nor a concern for me. If I thought the Supergirl TV series or a DCEU film had faults, I said so. In the last 17 years, I have served as a director, technical director, and camera operator at my local church in a live production capacity. I've been a video editor for 17 years, having worked in Avid, Final Cut, and Premiere Pro CC. In my day job, I shoot and edit news and documentary-style video content that involves interviews and narrative storytelling. I'm also currently an amateur photographer and am aiming to improve my efforts in still photography. You can check out my work over at Instagram at @TheDerbyKid. Link is in the video description below. While discussing these film reviews, music and film scores will inevitably come up. It may be good to know that in my life I have played piano, handbells, clarinet, bass clarinet, bassoon, acoustic guitar, and have even started learning how to play the ukulele. I've played in marching bands, symphonic bands, and wind ensembles, and have sung in many choirs. While I don't consider myself a world-class musician, far from it, actually, I do know some things about music and am a big fan of film scores and soundtracks. In addition to my production and musical experience, I have had lots of experience in art criticism. I've been podcasting about television and film since 2009 and do so on a regular basis with Supergirl Radio, a podcast I co-host about the CW Supergirl TV series. I am also a writing contributor to the Justice League Universe podcast that offers analysis on the DCEU films. You might even hear my voice occasionally in recordings and audio commentaries over there. I'm not an expert, but I care deeply about film, television, storytelling, and art. So I hope this gives you a background on where I'm coming from. I'm going to try to position myself justified opposite Ben Affleck here as Bruce Wayne. So try to bring a little different composition to these live streams. So finally got my background the way I wanted it to, because I got a kind of a late start. Fun fact, I built a bookshelf for myself this afternoon. So that's why I'm kind of out of sorts, as I spent most of my afternoon cobbling together a bookshelf to put my books that have been strewn around on and organize them a little bit better. I'd build it from scratch. I just bought one that I could assemble. So that's, maybe I should have said I assembled a bookshelf, not that I built one. I didn't build one with my hands. I just screwed some things in. Wasn't that hard, just took a long time. Okay, anyways, so nobody needs to know about my new bookshelf that I like so much. We are going to go ahead and get into Renee's review. And before we get into that review, though, I want to mention that the Miami Herald has an audio version on the page of this review that I guess is just the reading of the review, and it's 7 minutes long, which actually that sounds long. It does. It sounds like a long, long review, but I'm going to be reading the review, and I'm probably going to go longer than 7 minutes. So kudos to them that they were able to read it in 7 minutes. That is a feat that I cannot accomplish. And I see Andy in the chat is commenting before we get kind of deep in the weeds about the review. Andy says, so Rebecca is saying that for $1,200, she will come and assemble your bookshelves. I don't know that I would go that far. I've only assembled my own bookshelves But I recommend that everyone do it because it's a good practice in reading instructions and following steps and being able to, make sure that you know what you're doing. And I think it's a good practice that I do every now and then. I only assemble bookshelves. I don't assemble bikes. I don't assemble ping pong tables. None of that. Just just the occasional bookshelf when I need somewhere to put all my books. So anyway, I depending on what the bookshelf was, maybe I would do it for some money, but I'm not gonna start a bookshelf assembly business, so, let's not get crazy. I also see in the chat, Rami A says, "Hey, Rebecca, BVS is a great movie. Love the movie." Well, thank you, for being here and joining me. I agree. Batman v Superman is a great movie, and, I would even just say it's a cinematic masterpiece. You could disagree if you want, but that's not gonna change, the objective truth in that in that statement. Okay, well, let's get into the body and the content of the review. So I like to start with the title of these pieces, and this one says the audience loses in Batman v Superman: Dawn of Justice. Now, to me, as I read it, this is another example of how a critic speaks for the audience instead of speaking from his or her perspective and personal point of view. I personally have a problem with this. It's something that I try to stay away from because I really can't speak on behalf of anyone but myself. So I find this way of writing very strange because you don't know that the audience loses. What if I loved it? What if the audience I saw it with in the fan preview night before it officially came out and was released loved it? That audience didn't lose. I saw the film 15 times in the movie theaters, and none of the audiences I saw it with felt like they were losing. So I think it's something that if you're going into film criticism, I would advise you to stay away from it because it's something that you don't know. You can't speak for everybody. You can only speak for yourself. And I've discovered through podcasting, especially, that people, when they read your stuff or they watch your videos, they come to your live streams like y'all are doing right now. People want to hear your perspective, not the perspective of, somebody speaking on behalf of other people. They just want to hear your perspective. So write and speak about your perspective and how you see things, how you see the world, how you see art. I think that as a personal opinion, that's going to bring something new and different to the table instead of just writing talking points, which seems to be the problem in a lot of these reviews. Because I think the big question for me is, so if you write the audience loses in Batman v Superman: Dawn of Justice, so it sounds like everyone who sees Batman v Superman loses just because Renee says they do. Like, what does Renee know? Renee doesn't know anything, So I have a hard time with that. But I will say, I will give this title credit, whoever wrote it, Renee, an editor, whoever came up with it. But this title at least is attempting to be creative and tie into Batman and Superman fighting. So I will give it that. All right, so here is how the review starts. It says, quote, "In Batman v Superman: Dawn of Justice, the Dark Knight and the Man of Steel duke it out and the audience loses. Ever since director Zack Snyder first announced the movie at the 2013 San Diego Comic-Con, the frenzy of anticipation has reached Star Wars proportions. Here, finally, what was the film that would unite the two most iconic superhero characters in all of comic book history and pit them against each other. The hook is irresistible, even if you can't tell your DC from your Marvel. The premise of two unbeatable titans clashing has a deep, almost primal pull. Homer knew this when he made Hector and Achilles fight in the Iliad, and comic book writers have known this since 1940 when the Human Torch took on the Submariner in Marvel Mystery Comics number 8, Fire versus Water, the fight of the century. Superheroes have been brawling with each other for decades, sometimes because of a misunderstanding, other times because of moral or philosophical differences. The upcoming Captain America Civil War will force most of the characters from the Marvel Comics movie universe to pick a side between Iron Man or Captain America. It is based on a storyline from the comics that explored the tricky balance between freedom and security and what sort of limits and regulations we are willing to accept in order to feel safe and protected," unquote. Wow, what an opening paragraph. And wow, there's a lot of talk about Marvel Comics. There is so much Marvel in that opening paragraph. Oh man, wow. Uh yeah, so much to say about this one. I like the mention of the Star Wars proportions though, because it did remind me of back in the day before I think it was Force Awakens and BBS came out. They sort of were shooting at the same time. Zack Snyder and JJ Abrams had a little like social media not a fight, but like a competition about who could like do the coolest Easter egg stuff on social media. And Zack Snyder made uh these little pictures where he put Star Wars action figures and posed them in the desert, and he took a picture like I think it was like Batman and R2D2 or something, and JJ Abrams put the Batmobile underneath the Millennium Falcon, and so it was really good. It was really cool. Henry Cavill was like a dark Sith in one picture that got posted, so there was a fun little competition between the two of them that was always enjoyable. Um, David also says, and then the BBS teaser got leaked on the same day the Force Awakens teaser came out. I remember the day that the BBS teaser got released because I remember I was watching the leaked version like on my phone. It was not great, but when I was at work, like I could just like pull it up. So I was watching it on my phone. I was like, oh, this is not great because it was bad quality and all this kind of stuff. And then when the like the really high quality version of the teaser came out and Bruce Wayne is staring at the Batman cowl in the Batcave, I was like, "Oh, that's good." And then even like the high quality version, you could hear the voices at the very beginning. That teaser is one of my favorite trailers of all time because it's so beautifully and wonderfully constructed in the editing process because the sound design is so good at the beginning with all the voices talking about what's going on because you can hear it like pan in different ears, and it's so great. But it was not great in the leaked version, but when you got to see the official version, it was really really good. Let's see. Just hopping back in here in the we'll talk more about this opening paragraph for the review, but the chat's got some things to say, so I wanted to hop in here. And David also reminds me the stormtroopers got arrested by the GCPD. Yeah, that was fun stuff. That was always like good humor, playful things that were going on. And I miss that kind of stuff because I don't really think that happens anymore. But it was fun to see two directors working on big things. We're having fun with it. And I think that's one of the things that I enjoy about following some of the filmmakers that I do is that some of them really just love making films. And I think that, say what you will about J.J. Abrams and his overuse of the lens flare and some of the way he just, sort of his Star Wars films are not my personal favorite to my taste, just because I think they basically just are retreads of the original trilogy, but he has a style, so so I will give JJ Abrams credit for that. But he was having fun. He seems like he enjoys making movies, and I think Zack Snyder is the same way, so that stuff was really fun. Let's see. Levi underscore exiled says, hello, I really like your videos, especially the ones where you read horrible negative reviews of BBS. Well, that's what I'm doing right now. So hang out if you want to. We'll be here talking about the one from the Miami Herald. So this is a big project for me. I've been doing it for a while. I need to wrap it up, but there's just so many to get to. Let's see. Venkata says Zack also said in an interview that he told Nolan, "Get those IMAX camera lenses from J.J. Abrams. We need it." Yeah, so I think that's really cool that there's. It seemed like there was a little camaraderie between the two of them. That I thought that was really cool. Let's see. Okay, so let's get back into the review, and so lots of Marvel commentary here in this opening paragraph. So the first sentence, if you looked at the title and then you read that first sentence, you would see that the first sentence reiterates that the critic is speaking for the audience and just repeats what the title says. So that's kind of boring. We've already kind of talked about that. Well, I did think it was interesting that Rene reaches all the way back to the announcement of the film in 2013 to write more about historical context than the actual merit of the film. This opening paragraph has really nothing to do with the actual merit of the film. It's just talking about history and what's happened and Marvel Comics from the 1940s. Like, it doesn't it doesn't mean anything in terms of the actual art criticism of Batman v Superman: Dawn of Justice. How does writing about San Diego Comic Con address what was actually presented on screen from the first frame of the film until the last frame of the end credits? It doesn't. So if I'm coming to a film review, I it's one thing to write. I think it's a valid thing to write about the historical context. There are film historians that I think do very valuable work in terms of documenting things that are happening now so that 30 years from now we can look back on it and understand the historical context of when things were coming out, but not in a film review. That should be a totally different thing. I'm not crazy about that. The first paragraph here also makes me think that Rene would probably prefer writing about history and research than film, because now he's talking about the Iliad. I mean, the Iliad, he was really throwing it back to the Iliad and Marvel comic book history. A lot of Marvel comic book history, and maybe too much, in my opinion, for a film review about the DC universe. So he seems to enjoy writing about, or I don't know, maybe Rene was a lady. I should just say Rene. I'm not exactly sure. So I'll just call Rene Rene. Rene here seems to enjoy history and writing about things in a historical context and doing research. I think that's great. I do too. But that doesn't have anything to do with the merit of the film. And I do I do wonder, why is Rene pitching Captain America Civil War to his reader than actually talking about Dawn of Justice in the introductory paragraph of a review on Dawn of Justice? It seems a little slanted to me. Maybe Rene was really hyped for the new MCU stuff coming out and just couldn't stop from writing about it. So I guess there is that. But it does seem strange to me that there's a lot of Marvel talk in the opening paragraph of a film based in the world of DC Comics. I could maybe understand why this kind of stuff, this Marvel talk, would be included in the piece if you were going to do like a compare and contrast piece of how Civil War and Batman v Superman address similar issues in the genre of comic book films. But I don't think this is what this review is trying to do. There's maybe something valid to talk about how the films were similar and how they did things differently. That's something that you could write about. But if you're going to do a review of one of those films, it needs to be about that film. It needs to be talking about what is going on in that film and how it is presented to the viewer, specifically the reviewer here. So I think it's still just very mind-boggling. But instead, it seems that Rene would rather write about Captain America Civil War instead of doing a review about BVS. So that makes me think, I don't know, I don't want to read into it, but it does seem like Rene here is a little bit slanted towards Marvel and is more of a Marvel fan. And that does seem to lead to a suspicion that I might have, that maybe Rene is a Marvel fan and reviewing a DC film might be a little bit of a conflict of interest here. Let's see. Let's see if anybody in the chat has any thoughts. I think everybody's talking about the new DC slate that came out. So y'all continue to have your conversations, and we'll get back into the next section of the review. Let's see. Rene writes, quote, Batman v Superman: Dawn of Justice, which was written by Chris Terrio and David Esquire, is about a billionaire vigilante who picks a fight with a superpowered alien for accidentally toppling one of his skyscrapers. The movie borrows most heavily from Frank Miller's seminal 1986 The Dark Knight Returns miniseries, which told of an aged, bitter Batman who was forced out of retirement by a surge in crime and had to defend his brutal methods against a government lackey Superman. But Snyder and his screenwriters have dumbed down Miller's smarter, more resonant narrative and turned it into an apology for the apocalyptic finale of Man of Steel, in which Superman, played by Henry Cavill, and the evil General Zod, played by Michael Shannon, flattened half of Metropolis during their climactic showdown. Although the buildings that were demolished in the previous film were all curiously empty, Snyder took care not to show any fallout or casualties from the fight. The level of CGI overkill was so great that it was insulting to insist Superman's victory didn't come with an enormous body count, which would be a betrayal of the character's essence, unquote. Well, at least here in this section, Rene is at least attempting to dive into the merit of Batman v Superman: Dawn of Justice as a film, as a story. Seemingly an expert on Frank Miller's The Dark Knight Returns, even though it seems like Rene is maybe more of a Marvel fan. So that is something that I find of interest. The first two sentences of this paragraph are correct. So there are some true things that are here. Chris Terrio and David S. Goyer did write the screenplay. Chris Terrio came in after David S. Goyer, but they both get credit for the screenwriting of the film. It is a story about Batman and Superman fighting. There is some of that. However, the fight isn't just about, quote, accidentally toppling one of his skyscrapers, unquote. Bruce Wayne's motivation isn't just about the Battle of Metropolis, though that was his first experience with Superman. It was about the threat that Superman posed to mankind. As Batman, Bruce felt powerless to do anything to prevent a time when Superman would turn on planet Earth and destroy us. And this paranoia was reinforced by Lex Luthor's manipulation of events that framed Superman as the bad guy in Africa and at the Capitol. So already Rene is downplaying a lot of the substance of Batman v Superman and not fully understanding what the film is actually trying to accomplish with that story. Rene also believes that Zack Snyder and the writers turned BVS, quote, into an apology for the apocalyptic finale of Man of Steel, unquote. Now, while I see why Rene has taken that more cynical approach here, Rene is obviously a Marvel fan and would much rather write about that side of comics and has a certain slant. What Snyder and the screenwriters did was take what happened in Man of Steel and expanded on it to continue the story. That's not making an apology for it. It's just storytelling. Were they supposed to ignore everything that happened during the Battle of Metropolis? Should Bruce Wayne not have an opinion on that big event? Would that not inform how the world treats, handles, reacts to, and talks about Superman? I mean, what do you want them to do? Some of the buildings in the Battle of Metropolis were empty because Rene talks about the empty buildings. And so I would say that, Rene, some of the buildings in the Battle of Metropolis were empty because people evacuated them. Man of Steel even takes great strides to show that the Daily Planet had to make a decision about leaving the building and running around in the streets. Perry is even heard in the film saying, quote, all right, everybody, we're leaving the building now, unquote, trying to get away from all the dangerous action. Plus, the buildings that Rene is probably referring to are the buildings that have already been damaged and affected by the World Engine. Why would anyone be in there? They would have either fled from those buildings or died in them. So I know that there's a nitpick about Jack being in the film. BVS showed some folks like Bruce's friend Jack or the little girl's mother not making it out. But that isn't to say that everyone died in the buildings. Some made it out and some didn't. So I think it's such a nitpick to be like, well, you didn't exactly line that up to Man of Steel in the timeline there. Most everything was pretty close. They just wanted to show a different side of what was happening during the fight. So I think this is a real nitpick and a real stretch to find a criticism about the film. And that's my opinion. Let's see. All right, let's continue on. Rene writes, quote, Snyder took care not to show any fallout or casualties of the fight, unquote. What? What? This reads as if, quote, the fight, unquote, is referring to the Black Zero event or Battle of Metropolis in Man of Steel. So I'll address this part of the review that way. That's how I interpreted it. What is Rene talking about? Snyder didn't show any fallout or casualties from that event. People's cars in the street are pulled up and down, smashed to bits by the World Engine. Smoke spreads everywhere because of the terraforming that is happening. Other critics in the Rotten Tomatoes sphere have complained about the 9/11 imagery of people running around in the smoky streets and a plane crashing through one of the buildings. We even get to see a personal example with Jenny, Perry, and Steve of how someone got trapped during all the chaos of that event. Members of the military and Dr. Hamilton died to send Feora and the rest of the Kryptonians to the Phantom Zone. Zod and Superman start their final fight among the rubble of the destruction in Metropolis. Superman's ending conversation with General Swanwick addresses the military and the government concerns about Superman post the Battle of Metropolis. And so there's a lot going on there. So I don't know what Rene is talking about not addressing the casualties or the fallout from everything. And then in Batman v Superman Dawn of Justice, the film that Rene, remember, is supposed to be reviewing, the United States holds federal hearings to figure out what to do about Superman. The city of Metropolis builds a Superman statue in the Battle Metropolis Memorial to remember those who died that day. Bruce's entire story arc in the film is built upon what he saw that day in Metropolis in the aftermath of the fight and how it affected real people. Lex Luthor's plan is built on the foundation of Superman's existence, which is a point of contention for the people of the United States and the whole world. Wallace O'Keefe is the living embodiment of the casualties and the fallout of the Battle of Metropolis because Wallace loses his legs that day, and it becomes a story point later on when he appears before the government to testify, only, of course, to die in the bombing. So there's so much that they actually do to address the casualties and the fallout of the Battle of Metropolis. So I don't know what Rene is talking about here. Rene claims that BVS is an apology for the Man of Steel final battle, but then also claims that Man of Steel or BVS didn't address the fallout from it. These are contradictory thoughts and make no logical sense whatsoever. Plus, Rene is just entirely 100% wrong about this. Both Man of Steel and BVS address the fallout and casualties of the Superman Zod fight. So that's one of those things in one of these reviews. I'm like, oh, what were you watching? Like, I want to know what was Rene watching here? It's just mind-boggling. I'm hopping in the chat to see what everybody's talking about. Levi_exile says most of the critics who hate Snyder, the Snyderverse, are on Disney's payroll. That's one of the things that I want to do a larger study on in terms of video analysis is what some critics have come out saying. I saw recently there was an article from an IGN writer who said that they were encouraged by IGN not to write negative reviews of the comics they were looking at. So that kind of thing does happen. I remember there being somebody who talked on a podcast episode. I forget which podcast it was, so forgive me. When The Last Jedi came out, and some of the critics said that they could not write a negative review of The Last Jedi. So that kind of stuff does happen. I don't know whose payroll they're on. I don't know why they're doing what they're doing, but that to say that it doesn't happen is just false. It does happen. There are reasons that some people write the things that they do. Let's see. Andy says all the issues Rene is bringing up here just as big in the MCU films, but doesn't seemingly call them out on it. Yeah, the MCU. It's really funny. Not too long ago, I rewatched the Avengers, the first Avengers movie that Joss Whedon hopped into, the big ending of Phase 1, I guess. And I was watching it, I was like, how the Hulk runs through an office building with people in it, just destroying everything. How does nobody get upset about that? But I guess it's because the Hulk is a comedic character in that movie. So I guess it's funny that he's busting around and causing chaos in this office building where people actually are. So yeah, I think there's something to be said about how both DC and Marvel in these films do similar things, but only one side seemingly gets called to task on it. Let's see. Venkata says many critics were critical on Man of Steel's destruction. BBS actually answers it from the viewpoint of Batman now that they are calling it an apology. Yeah, that Man of Steel got just ripped up and down about all the destruction, which I never minded because if you watch like the DCAU and you see Superman and Shazam fighting, they're throwing each other through buildings. I mean, that's exactly what would happen if you had these two superpowered beings fighting each other. They would throw each other through buildings. They would break things. They would cause chaos. That's just the nature of that. I think if you as a director were to show that and they didn't really do much anything, that would be dishonest. So I think you have to show, I think Zack Snyder, if I remember correctly, he's talked before about showing the consequences of some of these things. And I think he's right to do that, to show that violence has a consequence, that you can't just hit somebody or kill somebody and it not have a consequence. So I think that's actually a good way to approach that because it shows that there's, an ugliness to violence. I think if you make a joke about I personally don't like it when jokes are made about that kind of thing because it doesn't show the reality of what's happening there. Let's see. I keep going down. Let's see. Levi_exiled has to go. Well, sometimes these live streams are a little long, but thanks for coming by to hang out and sharing your thoughts. The bear with no name says there are actual building evacuation procedures. People don't realize this. Well, what's interesting is I always thought it was interesting that there would have been somebody like Jack still in the building because on 9/11, if you were going to make a 9/11 comparison, that some of these reviewers did, the unfortunate thing about the 9/11 situation is that people in the World Trade Center in the towers were initially told to stay in the buildings. They weren't told to evacuate. Some people left. They had the good sense to leave, but there was like an official thing that told them to stay in the buildings. So that could have happened in Metropolis on that day too. Some of those people could have just thought it was still okay. So I don't know. It's I guess the human condition, human nature. Some people are going to stay. Some people are going to get out of Dodge. So I guess it's just up to the individual in that situation. Andy also says, was he drinking when watching and writing this? This is the whole point of Holly Hunter's character. Yes. Yes, they were holding Superman to task about everything in a congressional hearing. Yeah, it's right there. I don't know how you can miss it. Venkata also says sometimes these critics make me wonder if they saw the movie that I saw. Now, Venkata, I have a conspiracy theory, but I think some of them actually didn't watch the film. I don't know for sure. That's my conspiracy theory because it sounds like sometimes when I read these reviews, it sounds like they're writing the reviews based on the trailers that came out and not actually the film that they were supposed to watch. I've also heard stories, and I really need to like compile all this stuff because I remember hearing a story about how a reviewer went in to see like the first half of a film and then left and then just based it off the trailers. Like totally didn't watch the film and still wrote a review anyway. So the kind of stuff I've read things about how reviewers like fall asleep during the films. That I'm not surprised that happens. I'm sure film critics and film reviewers sometimes do fall asleep during these films. So I would not be surprised if some of these people didn't actually watch it. Let's see. And David is mentioning there's plenty of danger staying in the Twin Towers, even if neither of them collapse. Can you imagine the logistical nightmares rescuing the people above the impacted floors? Yeah, unfortunately that was a really terrible day, and a lot of people. It was a really terrible day, and it stinks that they couldn't get everybody out, and unfortunately that was just. It was just a bad, terrible, awful thing, an evil thing that happened, and I'm always impressed to hear the stories of the people who did get out, these miraculous stories of these people who just under I can only explain it as divine intervention stories that people made it out of those buildings. But yeah, some of them were trapped or they couldn't leave or they were told not to leave. Um, so I think I know a lot of critics talk about the 9/11 imagery as if it's a negative thing, but I actually kind of like that it shows the reality of what would happen in this kind of situation. If you had these two titans, these two superpowered Kryptonians fighting and causing all this destruction, there would be aftermath on the ground. People would be affected by it. It's not just one of these things where like the Hulk crashes in through an office building full of people and nothing ever happens to them. There's no consequence. I quit watching the MCU around Ant-Man, so I never saw like Captain America Civil War, I guess it was. So I think that they sort of addressed that stuff way later though, like way later. um but uh but I think you have to show the impact if you want to tell a good story, I guess I should say. I would think that as a writer or a director, you'd want to show what was happening because you see in Man of Steel what's happening up in the air with Zod and Superman. We get a good perspective of what's happening with them. We get to see how it's affecting Perry and Jenny and Steve Lombard. But I really like how BBS shows the other perspective from somebody who's outside of Superman's um, sort of cast of characters. Bruce Wayne comes in and he's got a whole different perspective of what's happening in this situation. And I like seeing that different perspective and seeing how he would be somebody, especially as Batman, as this hero, how he leaps into action. He's running through the smoke. Everybody else is running away and he's running towards the smoke. He's going and saving small children and making sure they're okay and rescuing Wallace, who, he calls Wally. Um, I think some of that is actually a good reflection of, if we took it back to 9/11, there's a good reflection of that from 9/11 because even though it was a terrible tragedy and a lot of people died, and I recommend going to the 9/11 memorial in New York City because it's wonderfully done and it's very informative and reverent to the people who died there. Um, but I think there were also stories of people helping each other that day and people rescuing each other. And so I think even though there was some of that destruction in the imagery, I think there was also a lot of care taken to show that other people helped each other. And I think that's, to me, that's something that I always find inspiring about those stories is that even among that horrible tragedy that was going on, people helped each other and people tried to get each other out and tried to save each other. And I thought that was wonderfully represented in Batman v Superman, especially with Bruce. Let's see. I'm trying to see if there were other things in the chat. Yeah, Levi_exiles talking about Wonder Woman, saying you can't please these people. They didn't even pay attention to the movie. You want to know another hypocrisy? People complained about why Wonder Woman was there, yet they complain why other heroes don't appear. Yeah, that's that's actually a good point. There's a lot of criticism in these reviews about um the what is it, the 2-minute Justice League cameo sequence where Wonder Woman or Diana's looking at the videos that Bruce is kind of showing her through like an IM chat, and they complain about that so much. But yeah, I mean, they could also complain about why just those characters, why just Wonder Woman in this big scene. But they complain a lot about her appearance. And Levi_exiled says in other movies, other heroes don't appear and they hate it, and the same people hated seeing Wonder Woman there, which was realistically written in. Yeah, I agree. I think the film BVS Dawn of Justice actually does a good job of sowing the Diana seed through the entire film. So we see her at the gala. We know there's something mysterious about her. Why is she there? What is she doing? How is she messing around with Bruce Wayne? She's one upped and and you see I guess I see. I shouldn't speak for anybody else. But I like that, there's a thread that goes between Bruce and Diana, and their relationship develops towards the end. And so by the time you get to Clark's funeral and the two of them are together, it makes a lot of sense why those two would be the ones to form the Justice League. Because they have made this connection, they've had this experience together, and they both knew Superman and saw him die. And so I think that actually is a good setup for a lot of that stuff. And I also think that there's, theologically a reason for her to be there, why the DC Trinity is there among all of this passion imagery using Superman as a Christ figure. It's very interesting to me that, they talk about the devil, if what does he say? If man won't kill God, the devil will do it. Lex says that. And then the Trinity fights this embodiment of evil. So I think there's a lot of reasons why Wonder Woman is there. It's not just to have a cameo. She's threaded in there with a purpose. Let's see. Yeah, and David says, yeah, the plot made Wonder Woman be in Metropolis and she watched the news. Yeah, it was actually, for Wonder Woman not having a huge part, they actually took the time to make it a reasonable thing that she was there. Let's see. Venkata says the Wally rescue scene is actually taken from the Detective Comics number 33, where Bruce Wayne is in a similar 9/11 type scenario. Snyder's comic accuracy on point. Yeah, that's a really cool Easter egg. Let's see. All right, so let's keep going on. Let's see where I left off on the review. So Rene writes, quote, so Snyder walks back that defense at the start of the new picture, opening with billionaire Bruce Wayne, played by Ben Affleck, watching the Superman Zod fight from the ground level and seeing one of his buildings, now suddenly full of people, laid low. This radical revisionism, which treats the audience like idiots, is the first indication that Batman v Superman Dawn of Justice exists primarily to live up to the second half of its title, to serve as a launching pad for a DC Comics film franchise to mirror the wildly profitable cinematic universe Marvel Studios has carefully developed since 2008's Iron Man. In other words, Batman v Superman is a sleek, stylish commercial by a studio desperate to birth a new cash cow post-Harry Potter. Almost every aspect of the film, from the shoehorning of Diana Prince, a beautifully blank Gal Gadot, aka Amazonian warrior Wonder Woman, into the plot to pointless cameos by several other fan-favorite DC characters, feels like it was decided in a boardroom instead of a writer's pen. Moving away from the golden, airy feel of Man of Steel, Snyder apes the dark, brooding aura director Christopher Nolan brought to his Dark Knight trilogy. But he doesn't have the breadth or vision to match that style. A lot of the movie feels like a retread, right down to the 956 retelling of the night in which a young Bruce Wayne saw his parents gunned down in front of him. Is there anyone left on the planet who still doesn't know how Batman came to be? Affleck, who gets top billing over Cavill, even though that this is essentially a sequel to Man of Steel, fares okay as Bruce Wayne. But these characters are too played out, too familiar for any actor to make much of an impression. Mostly, Affleck looks good in his cowl. His Batman is more physical and sadistic than previous incarnations, pushing the PG-13 rating to its limit. Cavill, relegated to a supporting status in his own movie, suffers nobly as Superman, a savior empty suit. Only Jesse Eisenberg, as the maniacally evil Lex Luthor, seems to be trying to do something different with this role. He lets you see the wires short-circuiting inside the villain's head when he schemes, but the movie has no use for him other than as a plot device, a mechanism to set certain events in motion with no apparent motivation, unquote. So we're back to this building thing with Rene. This is a real sticking point to Rene for some reason. Rene writes, quote, seeing one of his buildings now suddenly full of people, laid low, unquote. Now, I can see why Rene wants to make this case. I can see why Rene is really harping on this. Rene wants to say that because we saw Zod's heat vision in the building that Jack is in during the BBS side of things, we should have seen Jack in the Man of Steel side of things. But that just doesn't have to be the case. Jack has everyone evacuate, but just stays behind by himself. Zod and Superman are fighting. They're not. I'm going to try to say this in a way that makes sense. So Jack is there. He could have had everyone evacuate, so it's just him. He's by himself. And Zod and Superman aren't fighting right next to him. They're fighting near him, but they're not fighting right next to him. We just see the heat vision behind him. They could be on different floors. That heat vision extends a long way out in BVS, which we can see very clearly because it impacts multiple floors, which would explain the different perspectives in the two different films. So the nitpicking here is nitpicking for the sake of trying to provide evidence for his inaccurate statement that Zack Snyder didn't show any fallout or casualties to that fight. All Snyder is doing with the Jack moment is making things personal for Bruce. He had a friend in that building. His business was impacted. He probably knew more employees other than Jack in there. So I understand why this is a sticking point nitpick for Rene here, but it's almost lacking the ability to be creative and think creatively. And I don't think this is Zack Snyder treating us like idiots. He's just trying to show a different perspective of what was happening in this fight. But Rene thinks that that is the case. Rene writes, quote, this radical revisionism. Oh my gosh, radical revisionism, which treats the audience like idiots, unquote. To me, it is wild that Rene would write this. In my opinion, BVS actually treats the viewer as intelligent. I never felt like BVS was treating me like an idiot. BVS actually taught me things. I had to go research things after I watched it because I was like, what is if you seek his monument, look around you? Is that something? And so I looked it up and I learned about all these things related to that phrase. So I never thought it was treating me like an idiot. In fact, it was actually expecting me to be intelligent. That's how I view a Batman v Superman. It doesn't force feed me anything. I have to follow along very closely. I have to pick up on the references and the Easter eggs. I have to know things to connect the dots about the story. I have to make a connection to the story, the characters, and the visuals to find meaning in it for myself. The film never tells me what to think so that I can come to a conclusion on my own. Never have I ever watched Batman v Superman and felt like the film treated me like I was stupid. In fact, the film expects me to have a high level of intelligence and respects me enough not to hold my hand all the way through it. Rene also writes, quote, the wildly profitable cinematic universe Marvel Studios has carefully developed since 2008's Iron Man, unquote, which is, if you want to talk about radical revisionism, this is radical revisionism because those MCU movies didn't become, quote, wildly profitable, unquote, until the Avengers because most of them weren't big box office hits. In fact, some of them were huge flops. According to boxofficemojo.com, the first Iron Man had a budget of $140 million and only made $585,726,247 worldwide. The Incredible Hulk from 2008 had a budget of $150 million and only made $264,770,996 worldwide. So that movie was a flop. Iron Man 2 had a budget of $2 million and only made $623,933,331 worldwide. The first Thor movie had a budget of $150 million and only made $449,326,618. Captain America, everyone forgets this one. Captain America, the first Avenger, had a budget of $140 million and only made $370 million, $569,774 worldwide. These are not big numbers. They weren't even that profitable. The only reason people think that the movies made a lot of money is because the first Avengers, which came after all those movies, made over $1 billion. But before that, they were a bunch of flops. They were a bunch of low revenue generating, mostly flops in that first phase. If one were to make the case that they were profitable, then the DCEU's early beginnings, which would have included Batman v Superman: Dawn of Justice, would have fared much better and have been much more successful in comparison. So I just think it's so strange that Renee here would say that they were wildly profitable. No, they weren't. If we're going to talk about historical context, you got to look at those numbers. They were not money making machines until that Joss Whedon phase 1 Avengers movie. After that, they did pretty well. I think they're kind of on a downturn now. But before that, they were a bunch of stinkers. And I just think people need to remember that. So that's what I'm going to say about wildly profitable. Renee also says, quote, Snyder apes the dark, brooding aura director Christopher Nolan brought to his Dark Knight trilogy, but he doesn't have the breadth or vision to match the style, unquote. Yeah, because they're different directors who have different styles. What do you want them to do? Just copy each other? What a weird thing to write. Renee also says, quote, a lot of the movies feel like a retread, right down to the 956,000 retelling of the night in which a young Bruce Wayne saw his parents gunned down right in front of him. Down in front of him. Is there anyone left on the planet who still doesn't know how Batman came to be, unquote? It is mind-blowing to me that the film critics, the people we are supposed to trust for analysis of film and to talk to us about the artistic merit of cinema, are the ones who write stuff like this. This is all you got out of that sequence that opens up Batman v Superman. You didn't consider that this informs Bruce's character arc of how he's a fallen man and how that it plays into his character arc. That it doesn't show that he initially started off his Batman character wanting to do good, but because of the introduction of Superman, Batman has changed his rules now. You didn't consider that Bruce needs catharsis over the murder of his parents and specifically his mother, which plays into the end of the film. Not to mention the cinematography. You're going to be a film critic and not talk about Larry Fong's cinematography in that opening sequence. Oh my gosh. I tell this story all the time, but it bears repeating. But my friend Tana was over at my house. We were doing cosplay stuff for Dragon Con. We were trying to help each other make little costumes that we were doing for Dragon Con that year. And I had Batman v Superman: Dawn of Justice on in the background, just kind of as kind of noise while we worked on stuff. And she looked up at the screen, and I don't think she had seen it before that. And she said, wow, that's gorgeous. And I was like, yeah, that's good. And to keep in mind, I went to school for camera work, and I learned about different production things with television. I learned how to edit when I was in school. And so I have a lot of that background. And when I initially graduated from college, I taught my friend Tana how to compose shots, how to run a camera, how to, find different creative things to do. And so when she said it was gorgeous, I was like, she's using that eye of hers that I would like to think that I helped her craft and adopt. So the fact that a film critic here would not even talk about the cinematography of Larry Fong here is just so mind blowing to me. I mention all of this to say that there is more than just showing a retread of the origin of Batman. It's telling us things about Bruce Wayne. It's foreshadowing something that will impact him later in the film. Why wouldn't a film critic want to dive into these things? These are things that film critics should be interested in my opinion. Renee also writes, quote, Affleck, who gets top billing over Cavill, even though this is essentially a sequel to Man of Steel, fares okay as Bruce Wayne, unquote. I guess that's a compliment. Ben Affleck should feel good about that one. Renee also says, quote, Cavill relegated to supporting status in his own movie suffers nobly as Superman, a savior empty suit, unquote. Supporting status. This entire film is about him. He drives much of the plot. The world is debating his very existence. I would even go as far as to say that Snyder's initial 5-film arc, that was what BVS was based in and what it was pushing towards, was all about Superman. Renee also says a savior empty suit. So I'm guessing, I can only guess here because Renee doesn't really qualify these remarks with actual reasons. But I guess Renee here missed all of the soul searching that Henry Cavill was doing as Clark, all of the ways that his Clark weighed the meaning of what Superman was and what it should be, who Superman should be, what it should what Superman should represent, or how that suit became a metaphor when Doomsday stabbed Superman through the symbol that means hope on Krypton. Doomsday killed hope on Earth. That's not an empty suit. That's a suit filled with meaning and substance. Renee also writes, quote, only Jesse Eisenberg, as the maniacally evil Lex Luthor, seems to be trying to do something different with his role. He lets you see the wire short circuiting inside the villain's head when he schemes, unquote. Well, I'm glad to see some praise for Jesse Eisenberg's Lex Luthor here. He deserves it 100%. He's a great performer in the film, and I think his Lex gets some really great dialogue. So I'm glad to see at least some praise for him here. Renee continues his thoughts on Lex, writing, quote, but the movie has no use for him other than a plot device, a mechanism to set certain events in motion with no apparent motivation, unquote. No apparent motivation? I thought Renee was a person of high intelligence who didn't want to be treated like an idiot. Could Renee not piece it together that Lex Luthor's motivation when Lex Luthor spills it out to Superman in the rooftop scene? He explains to Superman why he's doing all of this. He makes it very clear that he was abused by his father and took it out on God for never saving him from that abuse. So now he can physically do something about his hatred for God by putting all of that on Superman, a being he likens to be a god. You would think that a person of high intelligence could figure that out. All right, I'm going to take a break and go into the chat to see what everybody's talking about before we move on. Levi_exile says these reviews need fact checks. Snyder with other people wrote those movies. His storyboards are big and coherent. If not for Warner Brothers sabotage, we would get the best DCEU. It's funny to me that and this is something that I'll talk about in kind of a wrap up to this project, because I want to do a video on so I've been talking about in these live streams about what's kind of broken about film criticism. So I want to offer some solutions and about some best practices in how to move forward with film criticism. And one of the things that I would suggest, just as a teaser to that, is to watch films more than once before you review them. At least twice. At least twice. Watching them once, especially for a very dense, theologically meaningful film like Batman v Superman: Dawn of Justice, where there's so much going on. Even when I was watching it, so I had the I bought the, what did they call it back then? I think it was called the Ultimate Ticket. I spent $100. Don't judge me. I spent $100 on what's called the Ultimate Ticket, and I think I also did it for Wonder Woman, but I don't think it was that much that second time around. But with the Ultimate Ticket, I could go see BVS as much as I wanted to. I think I could only see it once a day, but I could go see it as many times as I wanted to during the film's release. So that's why I ended up going to see it 15 times in the theater. And the second time I went to go see it was with my friend Christy. And when we left the theater and we were driving back, I was kind of staying with her and her boyfriend. And we were talking about the film, and I kept thinking, oh, yeah, there was this other thing I didn't notice the first time. I saw it here, and then we talked about it, and it was like, oh, man, that makes it so much better. And I was connecting dots that second time, and then the third time I would see something I hadn't seen before, and then the fourth time. And it just kept happening where there were more things that I had missed in that initial first viewing that ended up making more of an impression on me in terms of the quality of the film. So I think that reviewers in film criticism these days, I think they go see it the one time and they write the review, and that's it. That's what I get out of these reviews, is that I don't think they give it any additional time. And so that's why their information is inaccurate. It feels like they don't watch the movie because they only saw it once and they didn't go back to look at it. When I would review Supergirl episodes on the CW, Before I hopped in front of a microphone, I would at least watch it twice, and I would make extensive notes about it so that I knew what I was talking about, that I would have the right information. And if sometimes I didn't, the listeners and viewers of Supergirl Radio would check me on it. And I was glad for that feedback and making sure that I got it correct. But most of the time, I try to be very accurate. You should see my notes about that show. I have a very good archive about the CW Supergirl series because I made a pretty extensive notes. But I think that's, in my opinion, the film critic has a responsibility to be correct and to be accurate and to represent, at least in an intellectually honest way, what the film did. You may not like it. You can write a negative review. I think that's totally valid. Sometimes films are garbage. But I think if you are going to review something, it should be from an intellectually honest place. And sometimes when they make mistakes in terms of the facts, and I remember there was one review. I can't remember which outlet it was, but they even got the so in BBS there's like a card that comes up and it says something like 18 months later, I think is what it says. One of the reviews said, "Oh, it was 3 years later." That's not it at all. It was totally wrong, but they put it in there and nobody calls them on it. Um uh so I think, me personally, my solution to that problem would be to at least watch it at least twice. So yeah, I agree. Let's see. David offers up that Jack was not in the floor that Superman crashed into. It was definitely the same building, but I agree it definitely didn't have to be the same exact location. Let's see. Levi_exiled makes a good point. On a technical matter, BVS failed because it thought the audience would be a bit mature. People were there to see stupid entertainment and got a philosophy lesson. That is so true. That's why I laughed at the idea that BVS treated the audience like idiots. There were some people who I remember hearing from and reading like some of their criticisms, because I used to get in debates on Twitter with people. I used to have a Twitter account at Derby Kid. You can probably look me up in the what is it, the Wayback Machine or whatever. I deleted my Twitter because I didn't like the kind of person it was making me, because I got very bitter and frustrated sometimes with Twitter. And so I just decided, you know what, I don't like who I'm becoming because of this app. So I just got rid of it and didn't tweet personally anymore. And I feel good about that decision. So I've been off Twitter personally. I have to do it for my job and for Supergirl Radio, but I haven't been doing that since I helped get the Snyder cut released. But so I think that was November 17th, 2020. Was that the time? So when after that, January after that happened, I deleted my Twitter account. But I did right before I left. I helped get the Snyder cut released. But yeah, so I would get into these debates with people on Twitter, and some of them, I got the impression from my conversations, my dialogue with them, is that they wanted a simple story so that they could understand it like in one sitting and then go home. That's what they wanted from BBS. They didn't want something that was complex, that made you have to think for yourself, that made you have to connect dots on things. They wanted a film that held your hand. Me, personally, I don't like that. I want to be able to figure things out. I want to be able to find the meaning in it for myself. I don't want stories to hold my hand. Some of my biggest criticisms about other films or the Supergirl TV series was that it held my hand too much. Let me get there. So I think that is some of the problem, is that some people wanted to just have the stupid entertainment. They didn't want the philosophy lesson. I think that's a great, great way to put that. Let's see. Venkata says the Martha moment was the main reason the death of the Waynes is being presented again in the movie. Martha was the last word Bruce heard from his father. Yes, it was a retelling of that moment in Bruce Wayne's life, but it was from a different perspective, showing us something different about Bruce Wayne, showing us something different about the Waynes. That was the first time I've ever seen a depiction of Martha Wayne where she actually tried to fight back. That's awesome. And I think she does that in Frank Miller's The Dark Knight. Returns. I always want to say The Dark Knight Rises. That's a different one. That's totally different. But it uses The Dark Knight Returns stuff in there. So I always have to think about it a lot before I say it. Um, but yeah, I think it's a cool way of depicting it because it's all of the depictions that I've seen of Bruce Wayne and the Waynes being murdered and Batman's origin. They've all been very different, and they've all tried to find different meaning in them. And I think that's a really cool thing that you can see something over and over again, but because they come at it from a different angle, like the Batman Begins origin is different from the Batman 89. It's different from Batman the Animated Series. It's different from, I'm trying to think of the different iterations, Gotham on Fox. They're all different and they all say something different about Bruce's character or the characters who are around them. Like Fox's Gotham, has Jim Gordon talking to young Bruce Wayne about some really heavy stuff. And I think that's where he talks about, trying to find the light with him. And so it's very meaningful stuff. And even, Selena Kyle is there, I think, during all of that kind of chaos. So they do different things. And I think that's actually really cool. I don't mind seeing a retread of the Wayne murders as long as it's trying to do something different. And Batman v Superman definitely does something different with the death of the Waynes. Let's see. Trying to go through the chat. Looks like Dennis is here. Welcome, Dennis. Good to see you. Hope you're doing well. And the bear with no name. Love that name, by the way. If you ever come in contact with a bear, the only thing I know about bears is you gotta put your hands up and make yourself big. That's all I know about bears. So just wanted to share that with anybody in case you run into a bear. The bear with no name says rewatching films is super useful. I've had so many instances. This is just me from personal experience where I watched a movie for the first time and I was like, "Ugh, I did not like that. What is that about?" And then I watch it the second time and I'm like, "Oh, I think I actually kind of like this movie." That happened to me several times. It happens to me with comedies quite a bit. Happened to me with Romeo and Michelle's High School Reunion, which is one of my favorite movies of all time. But when I initially saw that, I did not like it. But it kind of grew on me, so I ended up being a big fan of that one. And then also, what is the movie with Will Ferrell and Amy Adams? Anchor? Oh, no, it wasn't Anchorman. It was the one with Baby Jesus. Somebody in the chat tell me. I'm blanking on the name of the movie. Ricky Bobby, the Legend of Ricky Bobby, Talladega Nights. That's the one. When I first saw that one, I was like, "Ooh, I don't know about this movie." But now I love it. So it actually happened with Anchorman too, now that I think about it. I went to go see Anchorman. Fun fact, I went to go see Anchorman. I was working at local news station in my city, and a whole bunch of us from the news station went to go see Anchorman with some of the anchors, which I thought was really funny. So I probably got more out of seeing it with the news people than actually enjoying it. So I think that first time I didn't really connect with it, but on a couple of rewatches, it really grew on me. So all saying all of that to say, I've had instances in my own personal film journey where I dismissed a film early on because I did not like it, and then I would go back and rewatch it, and then enjoyed it. I will not do that with oh my gosh, AI. That movie that Stanley Kubrick started and then Steven Spielberg finished. Will never rewatch that. That's just a personal issue with me. I will never rewatch it. I will never come to a different conclusion about that film. The little teddy bear is cute, but everything else, bleh. No shade to people who like it. It just was not for me. So there are some that I will take a stand about not rewatching. But I think if I did rewatch it, maybe I would find something different about it. Maybe my life experience now would inform me differently. But it was really funny actually when I did go see that. I think I saw it in the theater because I remember I was with some friends watching it because I think we could like go see it for free. I got them in for free or something. I can't remember how that happened. But somebody got up and left in the middle of the movie. And my friend Heather goes, "Good for you," because we all were not feeling that movie. So that's just a funny story in my recollection of artificial intelligence. Anyway, so other than artificial intelligence, I would say I would recommend that you rewatch films because you might find that you actually enjoy it. And it's interesting now. I guess we are 7 years out from BVS. When that Ultimate Edition came out, what happened? People started to see it a little differently. People started to be like, okay, this is actually pretty good. So I have a feeling that some of those people who hated it initially, 10 years later, they may have a little different opinion. And Venkata says, this is why I love Snyder's movies. They give you something new every time you rewatch them, especially BBS. Yeah, BBS. Even now, when I'm hanging out with y'all in the chat, people bring up different perspectives of different things that I hadn't thought about before, and it makes me like it even more. And Belle Rev Mendez says, yeah, BVS had me thinking for months and years after I watched it. No other superhero film has done that for me. I agree. I was thinking about BVS for a while and thought that I had figured all of it out. I thought I had found everything. I thought I had gotten all the meaning out of it that I could. And then I started this project and found that there were still things that I was learning about it and still finding meaning out of it. So yeah, so thank you all for sharing your thoughts. I'm going to get back into this review. We've got a little bit more to go. So let's get back into what Rene says. Rene writes, quote, "This huge, unwieldy movie is busy and overcrowded. There's a subplot involving terrorists. Amy Adams' Lois Lane is in constant need of rescuing, and Holly Hunter plays a gullible U.S. Senator. Unlike Man of Steel, which couldn't avoid the draggy pacing of origin movies, Batman v Superman is loaded with incident and moves briskly. But the only things that register are fleeting, inconsequential beats, such as the most outrageous Batcave entrance to date, or a dream sequence in which Batman imagines he's in a future realm in which Superman and his fellow evil aliens have conquered the world. That scene, which is shot in one long take, is weird and exciting and strange, a brief glimpse at the bolder, more original movie Snyder is capable of making. But after the financial failure of Watchmen, his epic R-rated adaptation of the Alan Moore graphic novel that failed to rake in the expected cash, Snyder learned his lesson. He's no longer going to take any big risks. I have thoughts about that. Batman v Superman Dawn of Justice does a good job of building up your anticipation for the title bout, and the fight, when it finally arrives, is an all-out brawl. The movie doesn't cop out with a draw either. There is an undisputed winner. But if you've seen the trailer, which has been inescapable, you already know most of the film's surprises, including the third act arrival of another infamous villain. That character should have been kept as secret as the movie's ending, which is one of the few things in Batman v Superman Dawn of Justice you haven't seen before, and leaves the story, if not dangling, then at least begging to be continued. Don't worry, filming on the Justice League Part 1 is scheduled to begin in April, unquote. Okay, let's break this down. So Rene writes, quote, "There's a subplot involving terrorists. Amy Adams' Lois Lane is in constant need of rescuing, and Holly Hunter plays a gullible U.S. Senator," unquote. Please, Rene, go on. Keep going. Please tell the reader about how those two events, the terrorist activity in Africa and the Senate hearing, are connected through Lex Luthor's grand scheme to frame Superman. You would continue with that thought, right? You would tell the reader that. I would assume that you would be honest in explaining that. Oh, but you don't want to mention that, but would rather make it come across as if they are poorly integrated into the film. All right. It also says that Senator Finch is gullible. How is she gullible? She is not a fool. She sees right through Lex Luthor. She doesn't. The only problem with Senator Finch is that she doesn't think he would have the gall to bomb the Capitol building, and probably thought that the security would have screened all of them and that they would do their job so effectively that they wouldn't have been fooled about while also keeps a wheelchair that they would be able to see through the bomb. She just assumed that the Capitol building security would catch all that stuff. She's not a fool. She's not gullible. She just thinks that Lex Luthor couldn't bomb the Capitol building. Um, I mean, even Superman couldn't see it. So how is Senator Finch going to know that there's going to be a bomb happening? To say that Senator Finch is gullible, I just disagree with that intensely. Rene also writes, quote, the only things that register are fleeting, inconsequential beats, such as the most outrageous Batcave entrance to date, or in a dream sequence in which Batman imagines he's in a future realm in which Superman and his fellow evil aliens have conquered the world, unquote. It is amazing to me that of all the things to criticize in BVS, Rene chooses to complain about the Batcave entrance, which is actually awesome. What? It's also maddening to me to read these reviews knowing that Zack Snyder had a plan for the nightmare sequence. And in that plan, the sequence we saw in Batman v Superman Dawn of Justice would have actually paid off later. But because of film critics like this, we will never get to see those plans fully realized. Rene also says, quote, that scene, which is shot in one long take, is weird and exciting and strange. A brief glimpse of the bolder, more original movie Snyder is capable of making, unquote. This right here is the first time in reading this review that I felt like Rene was actually looking at the film and making an observation about filmmaking. We've gotten so far down into this review, but this is actually talking about filmmaking. So I guess it's here in some level. Rene also says, quote, Snyder learned his lesson. He's no longer going to take any big risks, unquote. What? The very existence of Dawn of Justice is a big risk. This kind of film was not happening at this time. Rene talked all about the MCU in the opening introductory paragraph of this review, and is neglecting to mention that BVS was nothing like the MCU. It was a huge risk of BVS. When this came out, it was totally different from everything else that was happening at that time. You want to talk about historical context? This was a huge, huge, huge risk. I do not know where Rene is getting that statement, but it does. The review ends with the sentence, quote, don't worry, filming on the Justice League Part 1 is scheduled to begin in April, unquote. Whew, okay, ending a review actually, this ending makes me actually feel sorry for Rene. Because it seems to me, this is how I'm reading it, that it seems like Rene maybe hates this job. Hates watching films. That's kind of how I'm reading. Maybe that's not the case, but that's sort of my interpretation. That's what I'm getting out of this review, that Rene is tired of doing it. This entire piece was incredibly cynical. So I guess in a weird way, it's fitting that it's cynical in the way that it ends too. I will say that this review, Rene gave it 2 stars. I'm guessing out of 5. So I wish I could know why 2 stars. Rene could have given it 1 star or no stars. Why 2? What made it to 2? I'd be curious. There wasn't a lot of talking about maybe it was for Jesse Eisenberg's Lex Luthor. Maybe it was because Ben Affleck was okay as Batman. Maybe those were the 2 stars. I don't know. It's a strange thing. It also maybe should be mentioned that the review at the bottom says, quote, a Warner Brothers release, running time 153 minutes, intense violence, comic book gore, whatever that means, and it says adult themes, playing at area theaters, unquote. I want to know what it means by adult themes. Does it mean that it has serious, more complicated themes that aren't dumbing it down for the audience? That maybe Rene, if it has adult themes, it's not treating the audience as if they're idiots after all. All right, so I guess that is the end of this review. I'm going to hop in the chat before I wrap this up and just see what everybody else is saying. Let's see. The Bear with No Name says, I guess that BVS is tied with Man of Steel for me. Man of Steel reminded people that Superman doesn't need Batman to be interesting. Fun fact, I'm actually going to be at Atlanta Comic-Con this upcoming weekend to talk about Man of Steel. I made it a personal uh, pledge maybe for myself that if I ever did, if there were ever any anniversaries of Zack Snyder films coming up, that I would go to Atlanta Comic-Con and do a panel on them, just to be that person. Because it's been my experience that when I go to different conventions, Zack Snyder fans, especially Dragon Con was the worst. Zack Snyder fans are not treated well, um, joked about, bullied, made to feel bad. I was called a liar at a panel for saying that BVS had humor. You can look that up on my YouTube channel and find that video of it actually happening in real time. So because of those bad experiences, I decided that since Atlanta Comic Con would take panel submissions, I would go and do panels on Zack Snyder films. So if you're in Atlanta, check it out. I'll be doing a panel on Man of Steel, and I'll be dropping that panel probably on the DCTV podcast YouTube channel as a Supergirl Radio episode. So if you're interested in that, that will be coming. So yeah, Man of Steel is such a good film. The only real problem I have with Man of Steel, because I do have criticisms of it, it's not a perfect film. BVS, 100% a perfect film. But Man of Steel, the only real big quibble I have with it is the dialogue right before and kind of during when Superman and Lois kiss. I think it's stupid dialogue, and they should just have not said anything. We didn't need it. There was no dialogue needed. Just if it's going to be stupid dialogue, just don't say anything. So that's my biggest complaint there. And I say it's stupid because it doesn't make any sense about kissing the human. It doesn't make any sense. And it actually makes it bad. Anyway, that's a whole other thing. Maybe I could go into that in another video. Let's see. David says Chris Terrio actually borrowed a trope that was in Dan Brown's Angel and Demons. A guy in a wheelchair defies scanning because, of course, it's all metal. Yeah, it's a pretty clever way to do that. The only problem with the theatrical version is there's no. The Ultimate Edition talks about how there's a reason that Superman couldn't see the bomb because it was encased in lead. So I wish that had made it into the theatrical cut. I think that would have cleared up a lot of things for people. Yeah, David says there's a mention at the end of this review about comic book gore, and David reminds me that there's a lot of gore that was cut from the theatrical cut that was put back into the Ultimate Edition. So if you wanted some gore and see some real consequences to the violence, that was there for you in the Ultimate Edition. And Levi_exile says at this point, comic book movies aren't allowed to be mature and serious. Makes no sense. How can people be this brain dead? Well, I wouldn't say brain dead. I would just say maybe, what would I say to that? I think it's a lot about what we talked about before, about how people just want popcorn movies. For me, those are fun to an extent, but I want a little something more than that. That's personally, I'm trying to think about like other kind of popcorn movies that I like, and like I'm a big fan of Indiana Jones. I know there's a new one coming out, and I'm kind of hesitant to watch it after Kingdom of the Crystal Skull. I don't want to be tricked again by the nostalgia factor, but Indiana Jones, that series, that franchise of films it's fun adventure stuff. But the reason that The Last Crusade for me is my favorite of those original 3 films is because I find that there's a lot of meaning to it. I love all of the obstacles that Indy has to go through in order to get the Holy Grail to save his father. I think it's got some weight to it. There's stakes, and I really like that. It's fun adventure movies that Indy's like running on trains and riding horses and doing all that kind of fun action kind of type stuff, fighting Nazis and whatnot. But I like that it has something more to it. So I think there are some people who just want to watch the comic book movies for the popcorn enjoyment, but I'm the kind of person who likes a little more. I want there to be something more that makes me think about it. Let's see. David says, watch it for John Williams. He's retiring after composing after doing Indiana Jones 5. I have complicated thoughts on John Williams. I think he's contributed greatly to the cinematic composer field, I guess. But I know a lot of like music educator friends of mine have talked about how he's copied a lot of things. Some of his stuff is not that original. So that kind of, I need to do more studying on that. But some of John Williams, I don't think has been the most original stuff. So that's a little disappointing. But he has contributed greatly to the genre of filmmaking. Let's see. And David says this has been another great recounting, and I'm glad you enjoyed it. I hope everybody had some good times watching this stream. And I would like to thank the chat and everybody who showed up for contributing to this live stream and putting in your thoughts and your 2 cents, and maybe more than 2 cents. And I don't know, would it be, dollars and cents? I don't know. I don't want to calculate the monetary value, but a lot of monetary value from the live chat for me. So thank you all for spending some time with me and going through this review and talking about art criticism and how we discuss film, because I think the more we talk about kind of the things that we don't like about it, the more I think that we can learn about ways that we can talk about how we would want to do it better. And I think that's something that I think about a lot, is that when I read these reviews and I find things I don't like, I'm like, ugh. If I ever, write a film review, or if I'm talking about things in another video or on Supergirl Radio, I want to make sure I don't do this thing because I don't like the way this is done. So I really appreciate y'all hanging out with me and helping me think through those things, because it really adds a lot of meaning and value to me. And so I hope that's the same case with everybody who's in the chat. So thank you all for hanging out with me, and we'll do it again. I'll try to be a little bit more consistent. My schedule's been kind of up and down. But I'll definitely be scheduling streams in advance if you want to hang out with me for the next time. If you ever have any questions, I'll be scheduling them so you can see them on the YouTube channel. But I think that's going to do it for this week's live stream. If you missed this live, I hope you'll consider sharing your thoughts in the comment section below. And as always, if you have a BVS review, or even just kind of any review at this point, it could be a Zack Snyder's Justice League review. It could be a review about something that's not even a DC film. If you have a film review that you think did a really great job of actually discussing the merit of the film that it was reviewing, whether it was negative or positive, if it actually did a good job of delving into art criticism, I want to see it, and I want to be able to pass it along with the rest of the class. So definitely comment below and let me know what reviews that you liked and thought did a really good job, because I think we can always learn from those kinds of reviews as well. All right. Well, I think we've gotten to the point where I think voiceover Rebecca needs to take over and help me in the live stream. If you would like to see more of these live streams, make sure to subscribe to this YouTube channel at youtube.com/duckmilkprod. If you'd like to keep in touch with me personally, you can follow me on Instagram at The Derby Kid and on Vero at Derby Kid. You can hear my thoughts on the CW Supergirl TV series and all things Kara Zor-El over at Supergirl Radio by visiting supergirlradio.com, subscribing wherever you listen to podcasts, or subscribing to the DC TV Podcast YouTube channel, which you can find at youtube.com/DCTV Podcasts. Also, please check out the Justice League Universe podcast for in-depth analysis on the DCEU films, including Batman v Superman: Dawn of Justice. And before I go, I hope that this live stream video series will inspire you to think more critically and thoughtfully about film and storytelling. I'd like to leave you with this quote from C.S. Lewis's book titled An Experiment in Criticism. The truth is not that we need the critics in order to enjoy the authors, but that we need the authors to enjoy the critics. My name is Rebecca Johnson, and I love Batman v Superman: Dawn of Justice. And I am publishing a series of videos exploring the reasons why I am such a fan of Zack Snyder's film. In this series, you'll find my thoughts on topics that matter to me, like Larry Fong's cinematography, character analysis on Lex Luthor and Lois Lane, the Christian imagery, what I find hopeful about the movie, and yes, I'll address the critical reception. So if you're interested in any of those topics, I hope you will get something out of this series and find out why Batman v Superman: Dawn of Justice has had such a profound, heartfelt, and inspiring impact on my life.